Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my video lecture series where we're going over the different branches of government. We're transitioning today from the federal government over to the state government, specifically the state of Illinois, because each state government has their own constitution, so they operate differently. But we're doing Illinois specifically because I believe that's where most of the viewers will be watching from. So just like in the federal government, the state of Illinois has three branches of government. There's the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Today we'll be talking about the legislative branch. Why do we as a state need a government? Why can't we just follow federal law? Well, the 10th Amendment of the United States mandates that powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. So things that the federal government do not make laws about are left up to the states to make laws about. Where federal and state government authorities overlap, the federal government's authority reigns supreme. What does this mean? You can kind of look at minimum wage here and use that as a guide. So there is a federal minimum wage. I don't know it off the top of my head, but let's say it's $8. Then the state of Illinois could not make a minimum wage lower than $8. However, they still have lawmaking authority here. If they wanted to make a higher minimum wage, they could always mandate in the state of Illinois the minimum wage is $9 or $10. They just couldn't go below that $8 number mandated by the federal government. Who makes up the Illinois legislative branch? Well, the legislative branch, known as the Illinois General Assembly, has two chambers. There's the Illinois House of Representatives and the Illinois Senate. And they operate out of the state capitol in Springfield, Illinois, rather than the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And their authority to legislate comes from the Illinois Constitution rather than the United States Constitution. We as a state have our own constitution and codes to abide by. So a lot of the terms I'm using are very similar to the federal government. So we're just going to watch a brief clip to make fun of that.
Senator and I still have mystery. I'm always waiting to see what he's going to surprise me with next.
All right.
No, you're probably going to need some context behind this. This is from The Office. It's a popular show, 10, 15 years ago. The blonde woman in the show was dating a senator, and she loved to brag about dating a senator, but she was actually dating a state senator, which means that he's a senator for the state that they were in, I believe Pennsylvania. So he wasn't in the federal government, he worked for his state's government. And there's just two, because it's the states operate under the federal government. In the show, there was a notion that it wasn't as honorable to work for the state government. They're both serving the public, but people were making fun of her for talking about how she's dating a senator and making it seem like she was dating a senator for the federal government, even though it was for the state government. And I think another thing too was because all the terms are the same, it gets really confusing when people say senator. Do you mean senator? Do you mean state senator? Just to give you some clarity. So the lawmaking process for the state of Illinois is very similar to the federal government. A bill has to be passed by both chambers of the legislature, so both the Illinois House of Representatives and the Illinois Senate, and then it would be passed on to the governor of Illinois, who, for all intents and purposes, has a similar role of the president, but specifically in the state of Illinois, rather than the whole country. The Illinois General Assembly is made up of 59 senators. There's 59 districts that are drawn out. You can see on a map. So there's 59 districts, and each district has its senator so in your district, you have a senator that represents you in Springfield, Illinois. They only represent the citizens in their district. So unlike in the federal government, we talked about how the state has two senators and they represent the entire state. State senators represent specifically their districts, and their election cycles are a little wonky. They go just about every 4 years, they are reelected. However, because districts are redrawn every 10 years to work with the census populations, because they're redrawn according to population density, it's they'll have a 4-year term, a 4-year term, and then a 2-year term, so that the election cycles span every 10 years to make way for the census. Now, the Illinois representatives, there's 118. And again, you were represented by one person, just like in the federal government. So you have one representative that represents you down in Springfield. Now, these 118 districts are actually the 59 senators' districts, just split in half. And their election cycles happen every 2 years, just like in the federal government. And then again, this way though, because 2 years goes into 10 years, every 10 years it would change again with the census population. So finding your representation, again, we're using a lot of terms here. Where can you find who represents you? Well, I found a couple of links that show you the map as a whole. This bottom link actually is super helpful. You can just type in your address and it will give you just about everyone that represents you, I think both in the state and the federal government. So I have it here, and we'll just take a quick look. I'm going to type in my law school's address, and we can see who, if you lived at the law school, who would represent you there. So it zooms right in for you. Make this bigger too. And so you see it shows you who represents you on the federal level, but then we can also look. Your governor, J.B. Pritzker, obviously in the state of Illinois. But then you have, who's your state senator there? Maddie Hunter. Not familiar with him, but this gives you a link to see what they're all about. Who is the state representative here? Sonia M. Hardwell, again, not familiar. These people aren't personally my representatives. I live out in the suburbs, but this is a really easy way to find who represents you. And it gives you links to their website to see what platforms and what policies they stand for. So wrapping up this presentation, again, why does your vote matter? Why should you care about who represents you in Springfield if the federal government reigns supreme? Well, again, the 10th Amendment, we talked about how rules that aren't mandated by the United States Constitution that are left to be made by the federal government are left over for the states. So the states do have a lot of power. And when a good example of this is when Roe v. Wade was overturned by Dobbs. That was basically what the federal government used to say was a fundamental right, the right to an abortion. The Supreme Court said is no longer a fundamental right and is not meant to be decided on by the federal government. That should be left up to the states because it's not in the United States Constitution. So that's a lawmaking ability that should be left up to the states, which means that each state gets to decide whether or not abortion should be allowed within their state, which is why it's important for you to vote, whether you're for or against abortion. Your vote for your state politicians will sway whether or not that happens within your state. And just about every other law that's not mandated by federal government. I just know that that's a hot button issue that's also been recently in the media. That just about wraps up our presentation on the state legislature, but we will move on with the executive branch and then the judicial branch of Illinois and see how they all interconnect, just like in the federal government. So we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.